I'm not going to leave you here to die, Warden. Because I don't care about your bridge, and I don't care about your rules. If we go on together.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Service Management in the Movies. My name is Troy Kinsey, and today we're going to use the 1957 film The Bridge on the River Kwai to explore purpose, pride, and perspective. This film was directed by David Lean and stars William Holden, Alec Guinness, Jack Hawkins, and Cecilia Hawakawa. If you haven't seen it yet, I recommend pausing here for a few moments. Actually, for longer than a few moments. I think the movie is about 2.5 plus hours, but it's definitely worth the watch. I recommend pausing here and checking it out. There's definitely going to be some spoilers ahead. And I've included links in the description to the streaming and Blu-ray versions of the film. Okay, so in The Bridge on the River Kwai, a group of British prisoners of war are ordered to build a railway bridge for their Japanese captors during World War II. So what does this have to do with service management? Actually, quite a bit. But let's start with purpose. Leading through stress. Colonel Nicholson's men are starving, injured, and some are without shoes, but Nicholson insists on maintaining their dignity as soldiers. He continually focuses on maintaining discipline and purpose. Colonel Saito, the Japanese commander, tries to strip Nicholson of authority by redefining the men, not as soldiers, but rather as prisoners or laborers. If Saito is successful at defining them as no longer soldiers, he can undermine Nicholson's authority, or at least he believes so, and take control.
From the moment you surrendered, you cease to be soldiers. You will finish the bridge by the 12th day of May.
So this standoff escalates until the camp doctor, Major Clifton, warns Saito that killing the British officers in cold blood is definitely going to backfire. So Clifton often serves as the voice of reason, pointing out the madness of both leaders. So Saito then sets out to break Nicholson, putting him in a small cage, in the sun, and keeping them confined for days on end. At the end of the day, Nicholson doesn't bend, and there's some great scenes in here in terms of their rivalry. But in the end, to cut it short, Nicholson doesn't bend. So when Nicholson ultimately does win the standoff, he uses it to paint a new purpose for his men.
I know our men. You've got to keep them occupied. Fact is, if there weren't any work for them to do, we'd invent some, eh, Reeves?
That we would, sir.
So up to this point, the men have been working to sabotage the construction of the bridge, but Nicholson reclaims control, again by giving them a new sense of mission. Service management is tie-in here is it's important, especially in stressful environments. And as we all know, the service industry can be very stressful for leaders to give their teams a clear sense of purpose. It's not enough to tell teams what to do. They really need to understand why it matters. And maintaining standards, dignity, and a clear mission is important for motivation and team cohesiveness. Purpose gives the men direction, but it's pride that restores their dignity. So pride, maintaining morale through trust and integrity. So Nicholson understands that meaningful work itself can rebuild morale. By trusting his men and giving them ownership, he transforms forced labor into a statement. British soldiers will not be broken.
But it's going to be a proper bridge. Now, here again, I know the men. It's essential that they should take a pride in their job. Right, gentlemen?
Yes, sir.
Reeves, you're the key man in this situation as engineer.
So throughout the film, Nicholson, and his officers continue to hold structured meetings and formalize decision-making. Discipline and ritual reminds the men who they are, soldiers, not prisoners. And you see this when they stand at attention and will only break ranks or only be dismissed when the British soldiers essentially tell them to do so. They don't take action based upon the Japanese leaders. So pride is closely tied to trust. So the men trust and respect Nicholson and his insistence on maintaining standards and ideals, even when faced with torture. So even Shears, as cynical as he is, acknowledges the influence that Nicholson wields.
He didn't actually order us not to escape. He only suggested.
Listen, kiddo. When a man like your colonel suggests something, it's an order.
Saito, however, rules through fear and intimidation. So when he initially tries to win the men over with gifts and gestures, after trying to break Nicholson, it only backfires. It only breeds contempt with the men. So, and his and he precurses this with letting essentially chewing out one of his commanding officers, the engineer, and then taking charge himself. So all sorts of bad leadership behavior. So the service management tie-in here is pride can be a powerful motivator. Of course, empowering leaders and teams to solve problems on their own builds morale and engagement, even when, and especially when, external conditions are hostile. When leaders or a team comes to act for advice, and this is another good approach to take as a leader. When I've had leaders or teams come to me and ask me, what my recommendation might be for a problem that they have, is to turn it around on them and ask them, what would you do? What would you recommend? And providing guidance from there on out. But empowering leaders to make and teams to make decisions helps them think logically and strategically. But pride can also slip into obsession. So Nicholson becomes so invested in building the bridge that he risks forgetting who it actually serves. Perspective, keeping the eye on the prize. Keeping your eye on the prize. This is where Nicholson arguably loses his way. He is so invested in the bridge project and the pride of building it well that he forgets the strategic context. The bridge is, after all, a tool that will ultimately be used by the enemy to support their war efforts. His narrow focus leads to a dramatic and ironic downfall, and the final act, Nicholson realizes too late what he's done. So Nicholson begins with noble intentions, right? So he uses the bridge project to give his men purpose and dignity under brutal conditions. But over time, his pride starts to cloud his judgment. He becomes so focused on building the perfect bridge that he loses sight of the bigger picture. Again, that the bridge is going to be used for the enemy war effort. And in the last act, this narrow focus leads to his downfall, and only in the very end does he realize his obsession.
What have I done?
It's a fantastic scene. This is a great movie. So think of a team that becomes so fixated on service targets and ticket closure rates that they forget about the overall customer experience. Efficiency or metrics becomes the objective rather than the means to serve the greater mission. So now let's contrast Nicholson's character with that of Major Shears. So Major Shears, kind of, that joke will make sense once you've seen the movie. It starts at the other extreme. He's self-centered, cynical, and even lies about his rank to avoid danger.
How would you feel about going back? Come again.
So he enjoys some of the privileges of his newly acquired quote-unquote title, but certainly none of the responsibilities. Forced into the commando mission, he resists, not out of fear solely, although that's a part of it, that too, but a refusal to take on accountability. Yet over time, Shears changes. Inspired by the courage and sacrifice of others, he discovers a sense of duty. And by the end, he risks and sacrifices, again, spoilers, his life for a cause greater than himself. So where Shears finds perspective, Nicholson begins with pride and purpose, but ends up losing his. So the service management tie-in here is that teams and leaders must balance pride, purpose, and perspective. Metrics, process, and efficiency matter, but they're not really the mission. The mission is serving customers and hopefully providing value. Losing sight of that, and even the best work, best leadership, can undermine the greater goal. And then there's Saito, of course. At first, he's rigid and prideful, unwilling to compromise. But unlike Nicholson, he eventually steps back. And by ceding authority to Nicholson, he suffers definitely personal humiliation. But in doing so, he also secures the one outcome that truly mattered to him and his commanding officers, the completed bridge. So in service management, especially under pressure, it's important for leaders to continually ask, Does the work we are doing still serve our purpose, or have we become too focused on process or operations and have lost sight of the greater mission? And are we willing to step back, even at personal cost, if it means achieving the larger goal? And here's a bonus consideration, another topic that I've thought about quite a bit since seeing this movie again. Another interesting dilemma presented is the question of escape. So I get why Colonel Nicholson doesn't want to draft escape plans because he wants to retain control of his men and the situation. So planning an escape could undermine his authority, risk retaliation by Saito, and violate direct orders, as mentioned earlier in the film, to surrender. So maintaining order and morale is his top priority. But on the other hand, the ultimate objective of war, as I understand it, with my limited knowledge, is to resist the enemy. Escape, though difficult, wasn't impossible, and Shears demonstrates this later in the movie. So here's the question. Was Nicholson right to shut down the idea, or did he miss a chance to strike a blow at the enemy? And this is the kind of dilemma that leaders face all the time. Do you preserve stability and control, or do you take risky action with the potential for greater long-term benefit? Do you aim for short-term order or long-term impact? And in service management, the parallel might be this. Do we cling tightly to process, discipline, and risk missing opportunities for innovation, or do we tolerate more short-term chaos? And as we all know, change is about structured and organized chaos in pursuit of strategic breakthroughs. Neither path is simple, and the right quote-unquote choice often depends on timing, context, and values. So if you or I were in Nicholson's shoes, would we discourage the idea of escape? And what decisions would you make if you were in Saito's, Nicholson's, or Shears' position? So there was a ton of great material to choose from for this video. Today we focused on three concepts. When it comes to service management, leadership isn't about rank or position. It's about balancing purpose, pride, and perspective. So Nicholson shows that even how strong leadership can unravel when perspective is lost. Saito demonstrates that sometimes swallowing one's pride and adapting, even at a personal cost, is necessary to achieve the larger goal. And Shears' arc reminds us that even reluctant leaders can grow when they finally embrace responsibility. So thank you for watching. If you found this helpful, please, or interesting, enjoyable, useful, please give the video a thumbs up. It really helps us out. And if you'd like to learn more about service management, leadership, or project program management, please check out our other videos or our website at www.kimbalo.com. And until we see you next time, take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye now.